Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today, the art of versatility. Is it good to be versatile? What is it to be versatile as a writer of literary fiction? Is versatility to do with genre? Is versatility to do with style, storytelling? Is it a virtue, or is it actually a bad thing to be too versatile as a writer? The art of versatility is perhaps best exemplified by Kazuo Ishiguro, the English writer, whom I'm sure you've all heard of. And Ishiguro, it may perhaps not look like this over the last 2-3 novels, but Ishiguro really has been an example of great versatility in many aspects of his work. So it might be that you know him, you've read him, you've maybe loved him in books like Klara and the Sun, which I think is the latest one probably, it's 2021 or something. You may have seen, you may have read, or perhaps seen and then read Never Let Me Go, because I think it was made into a film or a series. So Never Let Me Go is already 20 years ago. And before the 2000s, Ishiguro was already writing in full flow. So an artist of the floating world, 1986 novel. The Pale View of the Hill, I think, is before that. It's the first one, I think. The Remains of the Day, probably, well, for a long time, his most famous book by far. The Remains of the Day is 1989. The Unconsoled, a massive 1995 novel. And When We Were Orphans, a 2000 novel. Now, one thing that we can say already is that, let's say, since Never Let Me Go, even though there was the book about the giants, a sort of foray into mythological, inspired, fantasy, contextualized sort of storytelling, this experimentation is perhaps less broad than it was at the beginning. Now, you probably remember that Ishiguro is of Japanese descent, but he was educated in England, good schools as well, and very good university. And so, of course, at least in that case, this duality has got to be taken into account. It may not, inform everything, and it certainly should not be the only sort of reading grid that we have when we think about Ishiguro, but somebody like him, somebody like Salman Rushdie, of course, is in the same situation. This duality, this conflation of two very, very different worlds, which means two very different ways of thinking about the world. This cannot be discounted completely, of course, as an undercurrent of what it is that they want to talk about. But certainly in the beginning, for example, an artist of the floating world set in Japan, and we have the same sort of narrative, dual narrative before and after that we have in The Remains of the Day, except The Remains of the Day set in England. And here we have experimentation in the sense of, that's I think one of the characteristics of his first books, a narrative with loads of sort of holes, as it were. It's certainly very pronounced in an artist of the floating world. The Unconsoled is the best example of that. When We Were Orphans, it's the same. And by holes, I mean that there is at times a lack of continuity in a narrative. Now, you know, of course, that continuity in films, for example, there's always somebody, when there's a film being made, there's somebody ensuring that there is a continuity between the scenes, in terms of clothing, in terms of everything. And that's also what we sort of expect unconsciously, is that there is continuity in a narrative when a story is being told in written form, so in a novel. And we understand that the continuity might be broken by, for example, a flashback or a flash forward or those things. And we understand now, by now, they've been, of course, very well established since, let's say, at least the beginning of the 20th century as techniques. But nevertheless, we expect the narrative to have a sense of continuity and not to contain too many holes, too many absences. By which I mean, for example, that there are elements of continuity that affect the world as well. So in the unconsole, at some stage, the narrator, or the main character rather, enters a bar to find a friend he's looking for, and the friend is sitting somewhere in the bar, just doesn't know where. So the way we read, as you know very well, of course, when we read a novel, is that we fill in the blanks that a novel leaves by using our experience of the world. So if someone says, on the way to work, I stopped to have breakfast, and he is, I don't know, an American, then we think, oh, okay, well, what kind of breakfast do they have? And I mean, we don't really think about it. We just sort of, picture, imagine, or simply accept without thinking about it at all that person, that narrator, is going to a restaurant, have some, I don't know, muesli or pancakes or eggs or whatever it is. And if you're an Indian reader, if you're a Japanese reader, you may feel that breakfast thing either with your own type of breakfast or what you know of American breakfast. But typically, narratives are full of those holes that we fit in, but we expect continuity. And when that person, that character enters the bar, what he finds really is that he walks, trying to find his friend, he looks around and he walks, and he walks, and he walks, and he keeps walking. And at some stage, as a reader, you think, wait a minute, I've never been in a bar that's that big. It's not possible, there's something here. And he keeps walking, and he keeps looking, and he keeps not seeing his friend, and he keeps walking and walking and walking. And you think, well, no, that contradicts my experience of the world. And the first Ishiguro were playfully using those things. When we were orphans, there's a large temporal gap, certainly, it's not explained. And when you come back after, I can't remember, 10 or 20 years, you've been given no explanation, you've not been warned that time was going to be suspended. And then the first question is, well, wait a minute, what happened? Why are we here now? But you're not going to get the explanation like that. And so in those novels, versatility here was in creating narrative surprises, playing with narrative techniques, playing with the very substance of literature. What is literature? Is it an echo of the real? Is it a way of telling something that didn't happen? Is it a way of telling something that did happen, but in a nicer way? Should fiction be an echo of reality? What is that reality, after all? What is it built on? What is that experience that you use to fill all those holes in the narrative? So, when we're often plays out in the Shanghai, so around the Second World War, when there was an English enclave, a small territory there, which is interesting in itself because Ballard, J.G. Ballard, the great English writer, grew up on that very enclave, in fact, and he wrote a book about it, The Miracles, something, his autobiography. So, Artist of Floating Worlds, we have those jumps, we have those holes, we have those unresolved questions as a reader. And we have that in the unconsoled as well, the guy who looks for his friend in a bar, which is even worse in terms of discontinuity, in terms of jumps, in terms of playing with our sense of space and location as well, where we expect the world to be a certain way. And then suddenly we find that it's something very different. Are we crazy? Is he crazy? What's going on? And it's not science fiction at all. It's nothing to do with that, of course. And in the middle of this, The Remains of the Day, where we have one of the most famous examples of unreliable narrators, a beautiful example of great writing, immense craftsmanship, and deep questions. Now, this play with narrative structures is not as evident in The Remains of the Day. Here again, we have a dual narrative, before the war, after the war. And not a word is said about that war in itself, the Second World War, which is probably telling in many ways. But nevertheless, we have discontinuity here again. But the discontinuity is much less, let's say, experimental, if one would want to use that word, which is a bit scary word, but it's not experimental in a sort of 1970s way. The Remains of the Day is much more linear in that sense, and clearly structured and literary. It's a beautiful example. It's one of the best novels I'm sure really ever written. It's got to be. And The Remains of the Day is also, of course, full of themes and rich in ideas and rich in thoughts. And if you look at An Artist of the Floating World, you can see nascent ideas about this, of course, certainly identity, connection with the war, connection with belief, in the beliefs that you hold, and what happens to those beliefs when they are confronted with, or perhaps contradicted by, the reality. This is, of course, the beautiful, beautiful ending of The Remains of the Day. And When We're Orphans is also, of course, this duality, this English enclave in the middle of China, again, a lack of complete continuity, but that in itself is an indication for us readers that we have to think about what do those absences mean. And really, if you think about yourself for a minute or two, and you think about the periods of your life that you've forgotten about, all the things that your friends or family say, oh, do you remember when you did this? And you simply don't. And you realize that your identity is made up of things you do consciously remember, or remember if you really try to. And then there's a whole lot of information you've forgotten about, and which still are part of who you are today. And that reminds us, of course, that one aspect of this versatility here in Ishiguro is his style, because you can see that his style has, let's say, evolved since An Artist or The Pale View of the Hills, or An Artist of the Floating World, and Klara and the Sun, for example. Now, at its core, I think since really When We Were Orphans, perhaps even earlier, there is a source of distance. The style induces a sort of distance. There is a certain coldness to the style. Personally, I think, of course, not everybody will agree, obviously, but which again reminds me of Ballard, when Ballard says somewhere in an interview, I think, he's being asked why you have a very cold style, a very detached style. Why do you write like this? Why do you not try to be warmer to the reader? And Ballard says, well, I'm like an entomologist. I study things. And if I study them as a scientist. I look at them from afar. Now, I'm not certain at all. I'm certainly not claiming that that's what Ishiguro is doing. But it seems to me there's always slight detachment, slight coldness behind his style. I know he's capable of warmer things. The Remains of the Day, there are certainly some very, very warm scenes in that, When We're Orphans as well. But if you compare Klara and the Sun and The Remains of the Day, for example, what you do see is that Klara and the Sun is very much easier to read in terms of length of sentences, in terms of complexity of the language. But at the same time, there is still some sort of space between the reader and the text, I find, personally. And that's also evident in When We're Orphans, I think, where you have to wonder at some stage whether the detachment is not intended, is not simply an effect of his style, but it is an intention as well. Of course, the writer's intentions are neither here nor there, as we well know. Nevertheless, you have to ask yourself, when somebody can be so versatile in writing beautiful, beautiful language, like in The Remains of the Day, but is equally capable in The Giant's Book or in Klara and the Sun to have an easier point of access, a point of entry in the language, and yet keep to that sort of detachment. I think you have to ask, what does he want us to do? And I think he wants us to think about the stuff and not simply, of course, read it through and think, oh, how beautiful. And I think it may have been, I have no idea, of course, so I'm just putting it out there. I'm probably completely wrong about this. But it struck me for a long time that The Remains of the Day, for a long time, was really such a bestseller. It was made into a film as well, and it was very, very famous, and people loved it. And typically they hadn't read the other books. They had read this one, and they thought it was a beautiful example of great writing in terms of style. And I do think it's a great book stylistically, but I think it's so much more than that. And I'm quite glad now that Ishiguro has reached perhaps an even wider audience with Never Let Me Go and Klara and the Sun, for example, so that he can put his themes as well and his questions out there, which is very nice as well. So that brings us obviously to another area of versatility here is what does he seem to be interested in? Now, if we take identity to be a very large word, a word covering a lot of ground, we're not really getting any further. You could say, of course, that in the first few books, his concerns were about this duality, Japan-England, because they play out in Japan. Certainly, you've got The Remains of the Day, where there's no Japanese to be seen, really, and this seems to be much more about the war in England. It seems to be much more about the moral engagement and the moral choices that one makes, and nothing to do at all with identity. But of course, the beauty of The Remains of the Day, one of the beauties of that novel, is obviously in the fact that this duality is induced by the identity of the narrator, and this identity is itself broken in many ways, and that is obviously another area of interest. And then suddenly you realize that you go towards Never Let Me Go and Klara and the Sun, when identity now seems to be less linked to a whole life or to having roots in this or that place. Identity seems also to be something that is built little by little, and he seems to be now more interested, giving more space perhaps, to the building of identity, and a little bit less about the dealing with an established or a questionably established identity, of course. It's a very different type of writer, but it reminds me of Shalom Auslander, the American writer, who in his first few books was very obviously trying to deal, perhaps in a therapeutic way, I don't know, I love those books, so there's no complaint, but he seemed to be very much dealing with his identity as a Jew, as an Orthodox raised Jew in New York in the 70s, 80s, and his relationship with religion perhaps, but much more with God and the Jewish God. And then you can see that in his later books, he starts being much more interested in Jewish identity itself, and his latest novel, Mother for Dinner, so for 4 or 5 years ago, is very definitely interested in identity, full stop. So personal to the collective of your group, to the concept itself. And it may be that in that aspect also, Ishiguro is showing great versatility in being able to go beyond what he started off with. Is it because he solved a problem? I have no idea, obviously. Is it because he thinks that his problem is only part of a bigger problem? Certainly, Ishiguro must be very, very smart anyway. But here we can see that versatility here comes in terms of themes, great themes like identity, and also more specific topics within those themes. So the duality, for example, is one aspect of identity. The construction is another aspect of it. The relationship between your identity and the world at large is another aspect of it. And all those themes are not only renewed in his work, in each work, but they're also enlarged or elaborated on. If you think just for a second about The Remains of the Day, and you think about the number of topics and themes that there are in this novel, I wrote them down very quickly. Notion of responsibility, of course, personal responsibility, responsibility to the collective, collective responsibility to the collective. The meaning of one's life in general, and I don't mean what is the meaning of life in a sense. I mean somebody in their 50s reflecting on the meaning they had for their life and asking themselves, well, was that meaningful? What did I do that for exactly? So terrible question to ask, obviously, but beautiful, beautiful novel and beautiful ending to that novel, of course. Serving a cause, the remains of the day is very much about serving a cause as well, and the worth of that cause and the cost of serving a cause to yourself. The notion of complicity, of course, which is linked to responsibility, especially here in that sense, responsibility in the face of the inexcusable, the unnameable. And the interplay between moral reasoning, personal reasoning, obeisance to higher powers and the like, the opposition between tradition and traditional ways of thinking and a changing world, democracy, the opposition between old world, England old world, and American new world, and all those things are in that book, and so much more as well. And that shows you, again, it's another aspect of Ishiguro's versatility. He chooses to do something because he can do it, and he's shown us repeatedly across several books that he has the complete toolkit to write any type of text he likes, in any type of language he likes. He can play with any type of narrative voice, any type of narrative structure. He can play with your mind, or he can help your mind. He can retain information, and he retains information not to be funny or clever. He retains information because it helps you think about what you're reading. And in that sense, Kazuo Ishiguro, is a master of literature. It's got to be said. Classic of literature, contemporary literature. Now, of course, the last question is, we could ask, and I have no answer to it, is versatility a virtue? If you look at Klara and the Sun and When Let Me Go, there seems to be a closer type of unity between those two texts than there is between the preceding texts. Preceding texts seem to be addressing very different worlds and very different things. And now, Never Let Me Go, Klara and the Sun are kind of seem to be going much more in the same direction. So does that mean that he's becoming less versatile? Does that mean that he has less the need for fireworks, putting that inverted commas, of course, because it's a very negative type of word to use, and this is really not what I mean. I think he's a wonderful example of writing. But in general, is versatility a virtue? And here, of course, very welcome to let me know what you think. You must know authors who basically keep writing the same book. But perhaps it's good. Perhaps then you can really dig in. Perhaps you can really explore something. If you think of magical Robertson Davies, the Canadian writer, for example, one could argue that many of his books are kind of one book. But isn't that precisely what we want? Because he explores something. He really explores all the aspects of one thing. There are very few writers who are capable of writing very different types of works, or different types of works, and that type very different. There are very few of those when you think about it. And the question here for us is whether they don't do it because they can't, because they don't have the whole toolkit that somebody like Ishiguro has, or Andrew Miller, a wonderful English writer, a contemporary English writer, still very much writing. Andrew Miller is the same. He has real versatility and complete technical mastery that enables him to write very different books as well. Hilary Mantel was the same. She could write very different books in very different genres and different types of narratives and language as well. To some extent, versatility has got to be a virtue, whether it's needed, whether it's the best virtue to have in writing, I really cannot say. I think there's good on both sides. So in the meantime, I can only urge you to return to Ishiguro if you've already read him and marvel in his abilities. And of course, if you've not read all of his novels, I can only recommend that you get going with those you haven't read. And if you're lucky enough not to have ever read Ishiguro, then I envy you, and I can only wish you the very best of reading experiences. Let me know what you think. Thank you, of course, for your being here and perhaps subscribing, liking this video, commenting on it. I'm very interested in knowing what you may think about this. And in the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.